Those who have studied comparative religions and even an ordinary observation of the fundamentals of every religion throughout the world, known, unknown, and even of the ancient and the past, there is one fixed thing which all have in common, and that is the idea of resurrection, a life which continues after this life has terminated. On this value we base most of the assumptions of doctrine and theology and most of the rituals and ceremonies which are basically a part of every foundation and religion. In these foundations there are certain festivals and feasts, certain anniversaries and so on, which are all keyed together so that there is at one time a feast, another time a fast, there is a form of recess and resurrection combined. It is this idea of continuity which is the basis of every hope of mankind. Without this sense of continuity, then the whole of this life would be entirely worthless, without purpose, meaningless, and waste. But even though we do agree in the general principle that there is a continuity of consciousness after this state, very few people really believe it in any depth. Most believe it that it happens to other people, but it probably will never happen to us. It's a sort of a going onness which eventually comes with a sense of age or even of desperation. Now, we must look at this question of life here and life there with a different sense of values, because if we are building everything on resurrection, that is salvation through death, then it means that we're losing the fundamental factor of living. And this sense of living is only an experience in values. It's an experience in contrast. Once we begin to see that these contrasts and shadows of light and shade, these changing circumstances and these altering and constantly variations of climate, thinking, religions, and so on, they are in a way a sort of a spiritual and intelligent gymnastics where we seem to try to extend our thinking into these various worlds and there to find comfort. For it is comfort which every religion seems to need to disperse into its population. But comfort and salvation are one thing. But when we begin to see life as a sense of contrasting values, many colliding and impacts, or a series of upheavals and crises, very often we become so confused with this constant variation that we can quite understand that many people give it up. It's beyond their comprehension. The thing doesn't make sense. And God, at least, makes least sense of it all. And in a sort of state of frustration, they accept that there is a religion, that there is something. And they continue to live in a state of fixed values, a state of unawakenedness, and perhaps in a state, shall we call it, of subconscious loss. This subconscious loss shows itself in all forms of behavior patterns. But what we're interested in the esoteric study of continuity, not life after death, but life before birth. This is far more important, because the preceding life forms the following life. And this life is a precedent, a procedure to another one. The next one doesn't matter in its sense, in that it gathers its values, its contrasts, its merits, from the contrasting experiences gained in this one. Once we begin to see that it is not the future and not even so much the past that is really deciding the buoyancy of our future, it is the actual now which is responsible for the hereafter. The now is responsible for the hereafter in the sense that continuity of consciousness continues in the same theme and the same vein, the same characteristics, temperaments and moods, the same sowings, the same reapings. The only difference is that the consciousness is released into a far wider, deeper, more varied and considerably more expressive atmosphere and state. The trouble with most people when they go over in a fixed state is that they take quite a long time to adjust themselves in their hereafter. For the simple reason that they have lived in a state of fixation, that is, they have presupposed paradise or heaven or nirvana, and they have manufactured that heaven in proportion to their earthly need. And for quite a long time they live in that sort of shadow world which they, in their imagination, in their longing, their deep desire, have found necessary to encourage them in their earthly comforts. But the esoteric side of it isn't satisfied with continuity, because that is a fundamental factor, the same as the sun rises and sets. It's not important. It's only important in the sense that it is a changing value from one set of perspective to another. It is this state of enlightened consciousness which works now, which makes the next stage so much more vivid, so much more real. No work here means that the shadowland has a long state, it has long shadows. Work done here means that the spiritual continuity is so aware and awakened that it enters into the fullness of life in an immediate state. There is practically no sense of transition. There is just this wonderful continuity, hardly a pause. It is a surging forward into an expanding universe, into an expanding consciousness. And it is this great surge into this wonderful state of enlargement where the whole picture of life takes on not only a new texture of meaning, but it represents tremendous possibilities. There are those who wait for the trumpet to be blown, and some of them are still waiting now. There are many who have different variations of need within their emotions and their patterns of thinking, that they must, in some way or other, precondition their thinking so that it is able to meet their present need. Now, we need to go one step further at this, because continuity is not only a wonderful message and a wonderful meaning, but it is preparation. And it is in this wonderful word preparation that we get the deeper meaning, the significance. We cannot enter or pass from one state of intense activity to another without going through certain conditioning, certain process. And life is a process of preparation. Without it, we couldn't enter into this higher dimension, this higher frequency, without this earth preparation and in all its intensity, all its contrasts and all its meaning. Once we see this, that the preparation of one life into another are not only the stepping stones into eternity, but they are the essential steps, the essential path, where one leads into the other. Preparation isn't just a sort of slow conditioning. It is really a state of constant reawakening, not only of our karmic sense and memory, but of the hidden potential within every character and every individual. And it is this wonderful potential that is concealed and hidden in the hearts, in the nature of mankind, which the esoterics seek to release into its new pattern and field. You individually are all capable of tremendous things. Each of you have within your own nature, within your own power, mind, reason, a tremendous resources. I think those words, imprisoned splendor, gives us a little vague insight into the wondrousness of the divine spirit contained in human form. And when we try to see or conceive the human form in proportion to the immensity of this spirit, we begin to see the smallness, the meanness, the insignificance of the contrast. But not for us to wait and wonder for the glory that is to be. It's getting on with this preparation which is most important, and which most people seem to think doesn't matter at all. Just to believe something, have faith in something, and all will be well, isn't work. It isn't revelation, it isn't resurrection, and it certainly isn't salvation. And within the human heart and in the deep subconscious memory are keys to all our problems. There are keys and signposts which can direct us through every impact, condition or contrast that we meet. But we have to feel inward for these. We cannot sense them in the outward motive. I try to understand that life has already happened, and that prophecy already is a state of knownness. We are merely living in a delayed state of consciousness. That is, our rate of consciousness has been slowed down to meet the vibrations of this planetary life which we experience. Density, we call it, or immersion in time. Now, there is no such thing as time, there is only darkness and light. We call night darkness. Day we call light. Now, if we think of light and darkness as a sort of barometer of time, we can begin to see that when we live in a world which has not the barometer of darkness and light, time immediately disappears. It is a state of conscious passing. It is a contrast of shadows and shades that affect the optic and the cosmic and solar forces which are contained in a human body. Once we begin to see that time itself is only light and shadow, and that life and death is but merely one stage of preparation for another, we can should begin to free ourselves from these emotional prisons of fears which we allow ourselves to become so immersed in. If we really believe what we know, if we have a complete inward conviction with this state of preparation and the deeper knowledge, then death should not have the slightest impact on us. It is a moment of collective rejoicing. It is a releasing of one body into another spirit, and one spirit into a higher consciousness. But when we meet the full consciousness, that is the whole personality, when we unify into the expanding universe, we then find that this small part that we have operated with for this short span in time if it has been allowed to usurp and take over the entire field of operations and has neglected and made impossible the spiritual preparation, then there is tragedy in heaven. To go back merely with a report of bodily ailments and no self-work will not get us by the gates. To just merely say that we did not do this nor did not do that in case we displeased someone, or that it affected our future or our security or our convenience, these things are going to sound very thin. Very thin indeed. If we have found earth life so restricted in that we have merely gone through the social round and waked in the morning, gone through the ritual of a day, night after night, day after day, without any awakening of this eternal spirit, without giving it any opportunity to be released, it is a spiritual tragedy, a spiritual loss. You meet this sometimes when you meet very old people who have died long since. Age is not death. Age should be an enrichment of maturity, of life, of living. Age should be a collective state of tolerance, goodwill, and broad-mindedness. Age should be humor, long-sightedness, and deep philosophy. Age should be the happiest, the most wonderful posture of the preparation of passing. But is it? In the majority of cases, a state of fear and meanness, anxiety, incapacity, and a spiritual separation. And the Lord never meant a life to terminate like this. But it isn't to the age where we get to that point where we should be enjoying the maturity of life, is the preparation before it. We often say, and I think it has quite a basis of truth, that old age is made in youth. And that the way we use our youth, that is the way we use the flush of our energy, that a tremendous outsurge of the primitive and physical forces, that will decide to a certain amount the resulting patterns in later life. This is reasonably true. What we must bear in mind is that every day is a life. Every passing of sunshine and shadow is an epic, it is a record, it is a world event. In that day, something has happened, something has taken place. Something has been renounced and lost, and something has been gained. But here we must accept that unless we can lose willingly and gain rejoicingly, or vice versa, unless we can work into a simple philosophy where the contrasting values of life equip us and not make us meaner and more despicable or make us more ugly. The passing values of life should make people more beautiful, more gracious, deeper, kindlier, more tolerant. If this is done, it's a sign that work is being achieved. That is, the preparation, the work on the nature, the work within the character, and the preparation within the spirit is in a constant state of action. That we're not living in a state of inertia. Work never killed anyone. But idleness and laziness kills young. Now this sense of idleness and laziness can be so slow in its erosion, and we can blame age or take anything we like to explain our idleness away. And we're very good at finding excuses. Nobody better. We may deceive ourselves, but we don't deceive our Maker, and we certainly shan't deceive ourselves in the Great Awakening. That if each day doesn't leave us more rich, that we haven't contributed into the inner and to the outer life, that we haven't given thought to God, to the meaning and the purpose of life itself, that we haven't made it a little more beautiful, and that day has gone and it can never be regained. Therefore, it is in this wonderful sense of continuity and self-work that not only keeps people young and smelling sweet, it not only keeps them active and their eyes awake and their bodies healthy, it also means that this state of constant internal and external observation and activity is making possible this tremendous and profound preparation, where one life flows into another. As this life flows, it takes with it its old patterns. It reconstitutes itself to some degree. And if we can free ourselves at this stage from many of the preconceived notions and ideas of, for instance, life in the hereafter, cheap resurrection, and just believing and have faith and do no work, those things are no good to us. They're just sleeping tablets. They're something which is trying to put us into a state of false security. The one wonderful thing about nature is its activity. Its continuity in nature, to me, is the surest sign of continuity within the higher forces. This wonderful state of constant activity, supplying and mingling and producing, centuries upon centuries, eons upon time, some of it millions and millions of years old, and yet still producing, still active, still working, ever young, ever beautiful, never tired. Nature is evolving the same as the planet is evolving, but it only evolves by work. It doesn't evolve by excuses. Neither does it evolve by trying to find a second-hand reason for not doing something. I think those words that many are called but few choose is very right. It's so easy to drop into the physical routine pattern of social expectations and go through them as motions. And the only thing that those people live by is the primitive idea of self-preservation. We need more than this. A Christos, or a great prophet or a sage, is not one that is produced from doing nothing. The workers of the future and the designers of the world's service are people who are so active and so busy that they have no time to think of anything else but being busy. But busy about what? To be busy about third-dimensional importance, which our contrast in values will disappear and melt away, or will we have all built foundations for our fourth-dimensional experience by becoming fourth-dimensionally minded, fourth-dimensionally interested, and fourth-dimensionally projecting? Spiritual beggary, in the question of what we call negative prayer, did no good to any. but the positive reaching out of the soul into the enrichment of experience and welcoming and going deeper and working through every problem with a sense of rejoicing in eventual freedom is much better than saying, save me from this, rescue me from something else, give me this, take this away. That is not living. Once we see that the true foundation of eternal truth is continuity, then it means it must be continuity in character. And there must also be continuity in truth. And truth must continually change if it's going to do any good at all. We cannot have static truth any more than we can have a static planet. For truth is merely consciousness in changing value. When we begin to stir our depths and our thinking and begin to plumb a little deeper into the significance of why we are breathing and living and why we're here at all, and begin to realize that the significance of this life is not merely existence, it's activity. And we must learn to live dangerously. And a little healthy neglect of our physical bodies wouldn't do any harm either. To be more concerned with the spirit beautiful and a little less with the imprisoned spirit within its own body. To release the spirit and therefore to heal the body rather than to make the spirit sick by imprisoning the body is a reversal of contrast. We get well by release, by work, by the inward and outward salvation, by which we acquire that deep merit, the rich experience, and the qualities of courage. I never could quite get used to the idea of a guardian angel writing down all the good and the bad and with a great quill pen and a large bottle of ink. Somehow or other it seemed to me a little bit like a school teacher I knew who always was giving us marks for everything. The only marks I really got lasted for about 4 weeks at a time. They were very painful to sit on. The point to bear in mind is that to try and work life by gain and loss and merit and reward. And that we shall gain this if we do that, and we shall be rewarded by something else if we are charitable and we give something away. The motive factor comes into this idea. Are we doing these things for salvation, or are we doing them because they are things to be done, without reward? Without any obvious meaning except the fact that we feel impressed merely to do. A life of activity has a lot to report. A life of activity means that the preparation is constant and real and purposeful. Oh yes, I know, the heart can ache and the feet can wander and the whole body can cry out for relief. But don't take too much notice of it. It's pretty tough. The spirit is much stronger than the flesh. The flesh is the weakest part of us and it screams the loudest, but believe me, it can do considerably more than we think it can. Don't be impressed by your pains. Don't be impressed by your physical inertias. I've seen people with bodies that have long since finished, and yet their spirit is driving them and using them, and they're doing jobs of work that just make the heart gasp with astonishment at the depth, the courage, the wonderful insight, the spiritual alertness of such people. It is in this contrasting that we must be more adjustable. Many people have often accused me of saying, last year you said this, and this year you say this. and it's different. That, I think, is the best compliment that we can be paid. That from last year to this year, we've done some work, we've thought, we've gone through some experience, we've dug up some meaning, we've seen another concept. So we begin to think and grow in our thinking. So if you're accused of being inconstant in your thoughts, take it that the compliment is that you are at least mentally growing up, where others think that values are fixed and have no other contrast than repetition. Now, here I think we could finalize this evening's work in this idea of flow, how one life flows into another. And the work that is done in one flows on and into the next. We are already experiencing now past flows. And we have used that material, we have used that depth and qualities and insights and experiences to build this one. And the more humble the task, the greater the spirit. The more proud, the more demanding, the more superior, the more selfish, the least spiritual. For humility and humbleness, or shall we say, the power of humility is such a contrast to the egotism of pride, that it is only those who can really work on the floor, on the granary floor of the world, who can wash and scrub and are not ashamed of their hands or the things they do, but to see them as activities in service, world service. Many want to serve, but they all want to serve on their own terms, with very clean hands and office hours, from 9 to 5, and no weekends. Many dictate to God how they should spend their lives and why they shouldn't do this and do something else. We've got to be completely acceptable in the sight of the Lord and stop laying down our own paltry and mean and despicable conditions. It's like going to a great benefactor who's given us all wonderful things. Then we say, well, we'll take all that you're giving us, provided you put it on a silver plate and you bring it to my house at 9:30 and don't disturb me after 10. This dictating to the great universal provider, to the great eternal perpetual motion, the divine architect, the eternal future, is pretty mean. And I think the thing which will give us most inconvenience when we go over are not so much the things that we've done, but how mean we've been. And this isn't only necessarily with money. We can be more mean with our thoughts and despicable with our mental and physical returns. Yet outwardly we may look very pious and righteous and religious and very good, and inside we can be just rotten. I'm not one to encourage the persecution complex, but I think to let one life flow into another one without being spiritually awakened and reminded that life is not just a wastage of time, it's not just a stomach emotion. Life is not merely going to sleep and waking up and looking at a telly and playing bingo and trying to get more for less. The tragedy of these things, the sheer miserable tragedy. No doubt the confusion of cheap religion in so many parts of the ancient religions as much as the modern ones, where these things are not encouraged, where self-work, self-determination, self-discovery are all so carefully looked after by somebody else, that the personal responsibility of the individual awakening is not essentially taught. And therefore we have to come back to the ancient teachings the old fundamental philosophy, the ancient wisdom, there to find a directive in this modern 20th century time. And the world is young yet, and we are young. And we shall live in many places, in many climates, in many planets. We shall enjoy the experience of many systems, cosmic, planetary, Earth, solar, and otherwise. We are on the threshold of the greatest adventure in space that ever man looked forward as his destiny. Here we are, poised upon the great brink of floating forth, flowing out into the great and wondrous consciousness of an evolvingness, of expanding universe. We're going to stand upon the brink and think only of our small aches, pains, and conveniences when the majesty and the wonder of evolution is calling us into the fullness and richness of life. Let's take every knock that comes and welcome it. Let's take everything which whittles down our pride and be thankful for it. Let's take everything which tests our meanness and finds our courage and stop being sorry for ourselves. To live dangerously, live with a sense of continuity, of fullness, of richness. And in this great and eternal tolerance, realize that the preparation, the work we're doing, isn't only for our own inconveniences, it is for the whole world. World servers are desperately needed, but world servers can't live on office hours, nor trade union rules. World service must come from every race, every religion, every climate. World service must be drawn from every profession. World service must come from the lowest and the humblest before they're even drawn from the responsibilities of the highest. These are great moments, and every day is precious. Every thought that we can give is a structure in the eternal future. And if in our own happiness and individual and physical and mental and spiritual release we can touch these wonderful resources in the lives of other people, only the smallest detail, then that day has not been wasted. Each day is an investment in the future, just the same as today is a result of the investment in our past. And this moment of deep recognition, where the continuity is the continuity of action and thought, change, of motive, non-motive, of purpose, and the ideals by which the life will flow, whether we like it or whether we don't. But to try and see that when we do flow into the next consciousness, we shall have plenty of building material. We shan't have skinted experiences. We shan't have dodged issues. We shall have probably left a pair of old tired feet behind and a worn out body. We shall possibly have left a body which has long since had the last drop squeezed from it, but nature will rejoice. God will rejoice in the angels and above all yourselves. It's worth it. It's worth every bit of it. So long as we don't try to reckon up the values and top them up now. If you leave your treasures in heaven, they'll be waiting for you when you get there. If we want to collect them all here and now and get all our rewards now, then there's nothing in the spiritual bank. It's empty before we get there. So what we can invest in the lives of others and invest in our own activity and purpose, we are investing in the affairs of the world. We are investing in the future consciousness of all consciousness. And we are participating in life at its deepest, its richest, its most wondrous level. And this is a full-time occupation. Not something for Sunday. Not just something for a scanty little prayer as you get in at night. It's something of every day, a wondrousness, a joyousness, a deep awe. And if we can get back that sense of deep wonder, deep appreciation, that sense of spiritual observation and contrast, and use them as materials not only to build our lives, but to have enough left over to help build other people's lives. This is a value and a power that flows. And this is where each one of you, no matter how humble your situation, or how high or exalted your position, this is personal and individual work, which we can do now and get into this flow of continuity, one stage, one step, into another. Now let us meditate on this. And in meditation, let us surrender these infirmities, these weaknesses, these fears, these pasts, and reach out into the sense of future, where our next stage of work lies. And in renouncing and forgiving the past, we are in a constant state of renewal and rebirth. Let us believe it and set this rebirth and renewal in action by renouncing the impediments, the fears, the anxieties, or the lack of discernment and faith now. And really shed this load. We've taken it on long enough. Now let us now, from this minute, liberate ourselves and enter into the full consciousness of the free spirit.